Kuzambo and a warm welcome to Bhutan e-learning project. Today's lesson is on Key Stage 3 for classes level 7 and 8 on the topic active and passive voice. I am Sangeet Tenzin with the lesson. First, let's see the objectives. We should be able to differentiate between active and passive voice, know when to use which voice, convert active voice into passive and vice versa. First, let's see what is an active voice. An active voice is a sentence which shows that the subject or the doer of an action is active or is doing something. To make it more clear, let's see the example there. The example, Sonam helped Jigme. When we say Sonam helped Jigme, Sonam is the subject there, helped is the verb, and Jigme is the recipient of the action, the object. So in this sentence, the subject, Sonam, is doing something. That means the subject is active. Hence, when the subject performs an action, we call it as an active voice. Sonam, in the example, had performed the action of helping Jigme. The sentence qualifies as an active voice. If you are clear with the active voice, now let's see what is a passive voice. Passive voice is a sentence in which the doer of the action is inactive. More importance is given to the action rather than the doer. Again, with the same sentence, let's see the example. Now, example, Jigme was helped by Sonam. In the example of the active voice, we saw that Sonam was the subject. But when we change the active voice into passive voice, Sonam becomes the object and Jigme becomes the subject with to be and the past participle of the same verb. Let's see the example. Jigme was helped by Sonam. When we say that Jigme the subject, here the subject Jigme isn't doing anything. Instead, it's receiving some help. So the subject is not performing any action. The subject, in other words, is passive. Hence, it is an example of a passive voice. Both the sentences mean the same thing. One thing that we all should remember is when we change from active to passive voice or vice versa, the meaning of the sentence should not change. Both the sentences mean the same thing, but in the first sentence, Sonam, the subject, is the performer of the action and is active as it does something. Whereas in the second sentence, Jigme, the subject, is the receiver of the action and does nothing but passively allows something to be done to him. That is why the difference between an active and a passive voice is, in the active voice, the subject is the performer of the action, and in the passive voice, the subject is passive, does not perform any action, but is the action sufferer. So that is the major difference between an active and a passive voice. Did I make you clear? Okay, then let's see now when to use active and passive voice. The choice of voice you choose to write depends on what you want to emphasize. If you want to emphasize on the subject or the doer, then use the active voice. And if the action, if the deed is important, use the passive form of the sentence. That is the first use of active and passive voice. Then the second is we use passive voice when we do not know who did the action. Let's see the example. The documents were stolen. When we say the documents were stolen, we don't know who stole the documents. And we are not interested in who stole the document, but the emphasis, the focus here is on the documents being stolen. In such cases, we use passive voice. The third use of passive voice is the receiver of the action is more important. When the receiver of the action is more important, again we use passive voice. Example, the pyramids were built nearly 5,000 years ago by the Egyptians. In this example, we want to emphasize pyramids more than the builders, that is the ancient Egyptians. In such cases, we use passive voice. Hope you all are clear with the uses of active and passive voice. If you are clear, let's see the examples of active and passive sentences. First, the tenses in the simple present form. Let's look at the examples on the board. Active form, Pema saves the girl. When we say Pema saves the girl, Pema is definitely the subject, saves is the verb there, and the girl is the object. So Pema is performing an action. Pema is active. Pema performs the action of saving the girl. So this is an example of an active voice. Now to change that into passive form, Pema is the subject in the active voice. Now Pema becomes the object in the passive form and the girl becomes the subject. And the verb to be and the past participle of the verb form. That you should remember always, okay? Now the passive form of the same sentence. The girl is saved by Pema. When we say the girl is saved by Pema, the subject does not perform any action but is receiving the action of being saved by the object. In this, the subject does not, the subject in other words is inactive, is passive. So the girl is saved by Pema is a passive form of sentence. Let's see the present in present continuous form. Pema is saving the girl. The same again, Pema is the subject, is saving is the verb, and the girl is the object. The girl is being saved by Pema. Now we can see that when the same sentence in its present continuous form changes to the passive voice, then the subject of the active voice changes to the object and the object of the active voice changes to the passive form. The girl is being saved by Pema. Pema became the object in the passive form and the girl became the subject. Similarly, in the present perfect, Pema has saved the girl. The girl has been saved by Pema. In the simple past, Pema saved the girl. The girl was saved by Pema. In the past continuous form, Pema was saving the girl. the girl was being saved by Pema. In the past perfect form, Pema had saved the girl. The same sentence in its passive form, the girl had been saved by Pema. In the simple future, Pema will save the girl will be saved by Pema. So, in all these sentences, the common pattern that you might have noticed is the subject of the active voice changes to the object and the object of the active voice changes to the subject. That is the uniform pattern there. And lastly, the imperative mood. In the imperative moods means when we give instructions, when we request, or sometimes when we command, save the girl. We are not interested in who is going to save the girl, but you are giving some sort of request, save the girl, let the girl be saved. So, this is an example of an imperative mood in active and passive form. Did I make you clear, children? I hope so. Then let us see another activity where we will change the active voice into passive voice. The first example, Mrs. Wangmo teaches us grammar. When we say Mrs. Wangmo teaches us grammar, which is the subject here? Yes? Okay, Mrs. Wangmo is definitely the subject here. Teaches is the verb form and us is the object. So, Mrs. Wangmo is actively involved, the subject there is actively involved in teaching her children the grammar lesson. That qualifies as an example of an active voice. Now, let us see how this sentence can be changed into a passive voice. We are taught grammar by Mrs. Wangmo. In the first sentence, Mrs. Wangmo is the subject and the students, us, is the object. But now you can see that we, those students, had changed into the subject and Mrs. Wangmo became the object. We are taught grammar by Mrs. Wangmo. The emphasis here is the students are being taught grammar by Mrs. Wangmo, does not perform any action. This is the example of a passive voice. Let us see another example. The teacher praised him. The teacher praised him. When we say the teacher praised him, the teacher definitely is the subject. Praising is the verb, the action that the subject did, and him is the recipient of the action. So, him is here the object. Now, the same sentence, let us see when we change into a passive form. Now, the boy there, he, became the subject in the passive form of the sentence, was praised, to be and past participle of the verb praise. Okay? He was praised by the teacher. Here, he, the subject here, does not perform any action, but he was praised by the teacher. So, he becomes the recipient of the action. Similarly, let us see a few more examples to make it clear. The fireman took the injured to the hospital. The injured were taken to the hospital by the fireman. An earthquake destroyed the town. An earthquake is the subject, destroying is the action being done to the town. The town is the object here. Okay. The same sentence in its passive form. The town was destroyed by an earthquake. Similarly, the boy's work pleased the teacher. The boy's work there. Okay, the boy is the subject there, and he did the work of pleasing the teacher. The action of pleasing the teacher. The teacher there is the object, and the teacher now in its passive form. The teacher becomes the subject in the passive form. The teacher was pleased with the boy's work. Are you getting clear with the concept of active and passive voice? With this many examples, I think the concept is becoming more clearer. Okay. Now the fire damaged the building. The building was damaged by the fire. Similarly, the police caught the thieves. The passive form of the same sentence, the thieves were caught by the police. Okay. Now, to make the concept of active and passive voice more clear, let's do an activity. And in this activity, as I read the example of the sentences, what you will be doing is you will be marking against each sentence whether the sentence qualifies as an active voice or whether the sentence qualifies as a passive voice. If you think that the sentence is active, write A on the side, okay? And if you feel that the sentence is passive, then write P and then mark yourselves. Okay, let's go then. The first sentence, he was writing a letter. What do you think, children, could be this sentence? If you feel that the sentence is an active voice, put A. Then if you feel that the sentence is a passive voice, then put P. I hope that you had done the marking, okay? He was writing a letter. Whether this sentence is an active or whether this sentence is a passive voice. Now let's go on with the second example. We had cleaned the room. We had cleaned the room. Mark A if you feel that the sentence is an example of an active voice, and mark P if you feel that the sentence is an example of a passive voice. Okay, the third example, the story can be written by you. Now, similarly, mark as I said, okay. Now the fourth example, my pen has been taken by someone. My pen has been taken by someone. Now the fifth example, Dorji kicked the ball. Okay, there are 5 sentences that you can see on the board. If you could not catch up when I was telling you to mark, then again you can revisit the sentences on the board and mark as active if you feel that the sentence is in the active form, and again mark it as passive if you feel that the sentence is an example of a passive voice. Okay, I hope you would have finished it. Now let's see. He was writing a letter. He is the subject here and was writing a letter. So the subject here is writing, performing the action of writing a letter. So the first sentence is an example of, okay, active voice. If you would have written it correctly, then give a big tick mark, okay? Then now let's go to the second sentence. We had cleaned the room. We here is the subject and had cleaned, that is the verb, the action performed, the room. We had cleaned the room. When we say we had cleaned the room, again those children in the class had actively performed the action of cleaning the room. Definitely the second example is also an active voice. The third sentence, this story can be written by you. The subject is receiving the action of writing, okay? So it is an example of a passive voice. The fourth one, my pen has been taken by someone. The pen that you have does not perform an action, but the pen there, the subject there, is being taken by someone. Again, this is a prompt example of a passive voice. Now, number one, active. Number two, active. Number three is passive. Number four is again passive. And the last, Dorji kicked the ball. What do you think, children? Okay, Dorji had performed the action of kicking the ball. Definitely that is an example of a active voice. Check your answers. The first one is an active voice. The second is again active. The third is a passive voice. The fourth, again, a passive voice. And the last sentence, that is Dorji is the subject and he performed the action of kicking the ball. So the subject there is performing the action and it is an active voice. Hope all of you would have scored 5 out of 5. With this, thank you for attending my lesson and being a keen listener. I shall see you all again in my next lesson.